with the theme of the last few weeks, I thought I would do another gouache painting today. This one is a study of 3 photos of eyes that I found on Pinterest. And I've really been enjoying painting with gouache. I've got to say, it's very frustrating at times, but I think I'm starting to find a bit of a love for it. I chose to work from right to left, as I try to always choose to do, but sometimes I forget just because I'm left-handed, so it means that I am not resting my hand on an already painted eye or other object if I'm painting something else whilst I'm painting on the right side of the paper. Now you can see my little makeshift palette. That is just a lid from a takeaway container, and it has gotten me through a couple of paintings. I just rinse it off and go again. They're great if you don't have a palette on hand. I myself do have a few palettes on hand. You can't see it in the screen, but there is a palette to the left that actually has the paints in them, and then I mix over on this. I do prefer to use a ceramic palette because, as you can see on this little plastic one, the paint beads, but on a ceramic palette it doesn't do that when you mix the colours. My ceramic palette is currently used for some watercolours. Normally I would just rinse it off, but I have a few big chunks of watercolour dried on there that I just can't get myself to throw out, and I want to use them for something else. I do also have a ceramic dish off screen. It's just like a little dish, I don't know, you put sauce in it or something. I don't know what it would be used for. I got it at an op shop. Op shops are great places to find ceramic or porcelain, I think. I don't know, one of those. But it's a great place to find little makeshift palettes for cheap. And that's where I got both of mine, and I use that dish kind of to mix up a bit of a master skin tone. I did it for this painting, or this eye, but I didn't do it for the other two because I'm more comfortable with more Caucasian skin tones and I didn't feel the need to have a master mix. Now let's do a quick little supply checklist. I am painting on my Travelogue journal. It is great so far. I find that even though it's cold pressed paper, it's not very textured, and that works nicely with gouache. I am using mostly a mixture of Winsor and Newton and Holbein Gouache. I do use one art spectrum, which is a white at times during this, and we will talk about whites in a minute. I'll get around to that because I've got things to say. And the brushes are just cheap brushes that I've gotten from an art store. They're nothing special. I do go between a flat brush and a round brush, and then sometimes I use a really fine one. Now, painting dark skin tones is something that I do not have enough practice with, so I'm happy that I got this study in, and I need to do more. I did struggle with mixing the right skin tone. I struggled with getting the right warmth in the brown, or just in general kind of the right tone that I wanted. And I suppose that this exercise did highlight that my colour theory, especially when it comes to mixing browns, isn't the best, because I do have a lot of colours that I can use available to me. One thing that I did struggle with, I guess, was having a base brown colour that worked for me. I intend to buy a burnt umber colour, but I was working with a burnt sienna, and it's a very earthy red kind of colour. So on my watercolour palette, I think I normally use a Van Dyke brown if I'm mixing darker skin tones, and I'm intending to buy quite a few gouache colours soon to fulfill a palette, and I'm at the moment tossing up between either Van Dyke brown or burnt umber, so if you have any opinions, let me know. I guess the other thing with this eye in particular is the highlights. You know, there was quite a lot of light bouncing off the skin, and I think I might have made it look a bit too ashy at times, and that just is a tribute to my struggle with mixing the right colours for that one. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how that eye turned out. So this painting here, I think, is my favourite overall of the bunch. And one thing I figured out as I went along with these paintings is that I was often going in too fast with a brush that was too small and trying to get in fine details when I was still really blocking in the form of the eye and trying to get the depth and the tones right. So when I limited myself to using a flat brush for a while at the start of the painting, it really helped me block in the fundamentals, and then I was able to go in with more detail. It's just something that I became aware of, that I was moving too fast into a detail kind of mindset and trying to refine things too early on. One thing that I think gouache is the master of is the ugly phase. Gouache paintings, I think, almost always go through an ugly phase, in my opinion. And I think it's just the nature of how many people approach gouache, and it's, for me, like blocking in colours. Like all of these eyes, I think for the first 20 minutes I was thinking like, this is not going to turn out good. I did actually see an artist the other day. I don't know, I don't think I'm subscribed to them, so I'm not sure who they are, but it was on YouTube and they were using gouache and creating realism, and they used it almost in a way that I relate to oils. And it's not how I paint at all, but it's where they refine like very small parts at a time, and so you'll have this realistic eye painted and none of the other painting has any paint on it at all yet. And that's a style that I really admire, someone's capacity to block in all the colours that they need for that eye and then make it coherent, like with all the palette across the face. I find that I have to work broadly to try and make it more coherent with a colour palette. But when it comes to gouache, for me, I'm very much blocking the colours and then start blending and then start refining. I definitely did have to hold myself back from overworking these pieces and really nitpicking, you know, every detail in comparison to the reference and my painting, because I think I say this with all my studies. I need to reflect on what is my purpose for this study, and my purpose honestly is never realism. It's never I don't want to be a photocopier. But these ones, you know, I did want to create a resemblance, quite identifiable resemblance to the actual reference image, but I wasn't going for perfection. And that's where I have to be able to step away and say I am done with this piece, and not go in and try and add things and refine things after I've started another painting. It's a study, it doesn't have to be perfect, and I had to be okay with stepping away. So over the course of these studies, I used it as a chance to try out the white gouache that I got in my Holbein set. It is, I think it's called Permanent White. I have 3 whites. I have a Holbein one, I have a Winsor and Newton one, and I have a Art Spectrum one. Most of the time I reach towards my Art Spectrum one, and that might just be because it is a way bigger tube and it's more affordable, and I feel better about squeezing a whole heap of that out onto my palette. And I can't say I have any complaints about the Winsor and Newton one, although it's not quite fresh in my mind from when I last used it. I know I used it a few weeks ago and it was just a bit, maybe it's dried up a bit in the tube, it was just a bit tougher to squeeze out. I find that the Art Spectrum one is quite separated in the tube maybe. It's very liquidy, but it's still very opaque. It does, however, dry up really, really bone dry, and it just cracks up a whole heap, and I find that it doesn't re-wet very well. I will try adding a bit of glycerin to it and mixing that up and letting it dry in a pan and see if that helps. But when I just leave it on my palette as is and it's dried up, I just don't find that I can re-wet it and use it again. So my hopes were high when I decided to try out my Holbein for the first time on this study. With the Holbein, so far I've really enjoyed the consistency of the paints and the re-wettability of them, and I had high hopes for the white. Unfortunately, it just didn't compare to the opaqueness that I love and enjoy and find in the Art Spectrum Gouache. It just didn't give me that white punch, and I found that I struggled using it, and I ended up putting more of the Art Spectrum Gouache onto my palette and finished off my paintings using that one. Now, that's not to say that I won't make use of the Holbein white. I do plan, and I've mentioned it in my other videos, on making an actual palette for my gouache, and I do intend already to have more than one white on the palette, which is quite common amongst gouache palettes because white can get dirty easy, and it's nice to have it in different areas of the pan as well. Areas of the palette. So I might try and see how that goes as a mixing white, and then having one of the others as a clean white. Overall, I found these studies really enjoyable, and I'm happy with the outcome, and I think they might have boosted my confidence just a little bit with my ability to use gouache. One thing that I've taken from these studies is to trust in the ugly phase and work through it, and that is one thing that I absolutely love about filming my art process, is being able to look back at all the steps that I went through and the stages that my painting went through before it arrived at the final piece. And I think it's really great for people to be able to see that good looking art, and you know, I'm not saying that my art necessarily is good looking, that's debatable and contextual, but good looking art doesn't just happen, it is a process. And I thought I'd just quickly mention this eye that I'm painting now was an eye of an older gentleman who had quite a lot of skin texture, and I just noped right out of there. By the time I'd done these first two paintings, I think the first one probably took me about 2 hours, and the second one would have been sitting probably just above an hour. This one, I just was not willing to attempt to add in the skin texture and all that, so maybe that's something for future me to attempt, is someone who's got more texture and wrinkles within their skin, and exploring how I can incorporate that and I guess portray that using gouache. So after a few studies, I have done the vegetables. I did a painting of a hand last week and a snake, and this week I have done an eye study. I'm pretty excited to tackle a face and a figure and something that involves tying it all a bit more together, maybe not the vegetables, but I'm starting to feel ready to go a bit bigger with my paintings. It's time to wrap it up, so I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up and let me know down below what you think. If you'd like to see more, feel free to subscribe. I'm getting videos out weekly at the moment, and if you'd like to see any of my other art or any potential behind the scenes, head over to my Instagram, which is linked down below. I hope you guys have a great day.